you're on.
So I first just want to point out that the first 10 to 15 minutes of this next lesson that I'm going to be doing are the same exact thing as the last 10 minutes of Sheena's lesson. So it's going to be going over this observation sheet. If it feels a little fast, it's because we just did. So, okay. Thank you all for attending ACT. Again, here we're at lesson 6. So lesson 6, we're going to talk a little bit more about communication, how that affects the workplace, and hopefully you can take some of those things home, because ACT is one of those things where we practice it and we practice it at work, and then the real good stories that you hear are of people taking it home and improving their overall lives. If you could please turn your participant guide to page 37. 37. Okay, so 37, Communication Module, Lesson 6. Could I have a volunteer to read the purpose of today's lesson? Thank you.
To create the opportunity for everyone to understand how assumptions, fears, and biases can hinder our ability to communicate effectively.
So, thank you very much. Last lesson we did an exercise with Legos. And it was a demonstration or a physical representation of what we're about to talk about today. So, like Greg just read for us in the purpose, fears and biases, there can also be different obstacles and different parameters put in place that can hinder communication. Can someone please read importance for me?
I got it.
Thank you, Don.
Every day we are bombarded with messages from people trying to get our attention. No matter how many new technologies and modes of communication we develop, communicating effectively is still hard to do. We all use techniques we've learned from our past that either help or hinder our ability to learn and to be heard. Likewise, we each have biases and prejudices, misconceptions and assumptions about others that can disrupt the flow of information. It is not enough to send a message. Good communication is a two-way exchange, and good communicators connect. When we connect with others, we increase our influence with it.
Thank you, Donnie. So we're going to first turn back, like I just mentioned, to our last class, and excuse if I'm positionally inconvenient for anyone here. But so if you remember in our last class, we made Legos. I was a participant, Greg was a participant, Wes was the builder, I was the runner, or Wes was the director, which I guess the builder as well, and then you were the actual end user builder. So Donnie actually wrote down a few things during taking a look at how we were interacting, how we were communicating. So clarity of directions and explanation. Can somebody tell me what they remember from that activity, how in either the first or the second set of parameters, how the clarity of explanation and directions went?
Well, the first one where you weren't allowed to ask questions, so I felt that the clarity was spot on. They were careful. They were almost with the thought in mind that I only have one shot at this before you go and kind of explain this,
Okay.
since you couldn't talk. So it seemed almost like it was a lot more understanding that you only have one shot at this. So hopefully when you come back, you won't say the same thing again.
So if I may paraphrase what you're saying that because we understood the gravity of the fact that this was our one shot, we paid extra attention, we were extra careful, we may have given better directions. Okay, that's fair. And guys, forgive me if Donnie and Sheena are going to be answering most of these questions. They were the ones that weren't involved more so. So they might be an outsider's perspective, but Greg, feel free to give us an inside perspective because you were one of the participants. So clarifying questions, were there any situations where clarifying questions either helped or maybe hindered the communication?
Yeah, when I was repeating back that the pieces were forming a certain shape, it caused you to question it because it was different than the information you've been told, and it shut down our communication.
So watching it initially, Greg was putting it together the same way you were describing it. He just interpreted it in the, what I'm trying to say, differently.
Yes.
And then when he asked you to clarify. Now you started second guessing yourself, and you guys spent probably about a minute and a half just trying to overcome that. It was a long time just trying to overcome that one piece of it. So you were like, I'm gonna go back.
So, do you think it was a language barrier, or do you think we were talking about the same thing and didn't realize it because maybe either we could look at it or...
You were. That's just, you were. So I was watching him trying to do it the way you said it, he'd have it, but then it was almost like Greg was like, well, it could be this too, and moved it a little bit, and then that's when he questioned you, and then your face would get,
So, and that
wait,
was in the
that
second...
could be right.
That was in the second group, right? That was in the
Yeah,
second
when
time
he could talk
around.
back to you.
So what was the difference between the second and the first group that created the holdup, more or less?
Well, the second, what I realized was, it was quite interesting where when Greg couldn't make a 90-degree angle with two pieces, it kind of got thrown out, and now the dynamic of the way the other pieces are affected started kind of taking over.
Okay.
So we did it, in all these are steps that happen, right? And step number one was learning how to communicate.
Yes.
And we were communicating, but we weren't speaking the same language. The language was the language of the blocks, right?
Yes.
We were starting to understand a cipher. You were saying 2x6s, 2x8s, colors, and everything else. But in that moment when the pressure got turned up, that language wasn't being communicated because there was two green pieces that were completely different colors and different shapes. But I couldn't distinguish between one and the other.
And personally, neither could I.
But we would have, if we would have kept progressing, we would have learned that language of those, of the
Yeah.
blocks.
And he did it at the very end.
Well, so we would have found
We did that.
specifics within the language that were to increase, awareness in what's going on.
So because of the difference in there, that's why you guys were more effective the first time around, because you couldn't express your self-doubt, you didn't have that to be able to question each other's language. You just assumed.
It could also be dumb luck because he chose black,
Right.
black and yellow side by side, they're the same shape. So
It could be.
the shapes that were chosen were
Made it
easier the first
easier.
time. A purple piece with a 45-degree angle with a yellow and green side by side, the same shape. It's like, okay, well, it's.
Looking back, that was the
But did
slow
you
facing
explain-
towards you. It was like, boom, we're on the same page.
But wasn't that wrong? That was in the wrong spot the first time.
It was
No.
moved later,
It was moved
but
later.
initially
I
we
put it
were on
right
the same
spot
page.
initially, and then based on a later instruction, I thought I was overthinking, I guess.
Thank you, guys. Active listening. Does anyone have any examples of active listening being demonstrated? And I know what you might say, but
I want to answer that.
go ahead. Thank you.
The intensity on your face was beautiful.
Wait
I
till you
knew
see it.
that it was, oh, do you have that on
I
the
have
board?
videos.
So the active listening, you were trying so hard to try and remember these pieces and which way they were facing. So
And you could
it
see
was
it.
very intense.
It was
Yeah.
weird. Like you had no expression, but we knew.
I'd consider it laser focused.
Like he almost turned white
So-
standing there.
One question that I have for you guys is, you all know me, maybe not well, maybe not well. What do you think the difference was? Because if I was laser focused like that all the time, if I was 100% active listening, I maybe not have expressed a fear that I need to work on my active listening. What do you think the difference was, or the change that made me act like that? What do you think? Why?
I don't know, I've noticed when you get, you're fun, you're easy, you're, just carefree, easy to talk to all the time. And I notice, especially like being in this class with you, sitting, when you get into a topic or there's something that you're being dead serious about or you feel intensely about, you can see it all over your face.
Okay.
Like, it's like all of that, just, it goes away, you're like, you can just see the focus, you can see like the tunnel vision. Like, no, this is my thought. However, whatever's going through your head, you can just see your focus in it.
Okay. Go ahead.
So with your cohorts from Hamburg,
Mhm.
you're very comfortable with them.
Of course.
I think you were trying to build trust with me and with Greg. You wanted to get the information that I'm giving to you to Greg so that he knows he can count on you. And not that that's what it was, but you're letting us know that it's important to you to listen to us to convey the message to each other.
Yeah, I did make several notes.
Yeah, I really felt like he's, not that you're trying to impress me, but you're trying to let me know that you're trustworthy.
So, thank you. You said one word that I think is really important, and if I may give my own opinion, important. I think self-reflecting, looking back on it, it was because it was very important to me. And because in that moment, that was my task. There's time parameters, this is what we were gonna do. So it was the fact that maybe 100% of my brain was just, this is what we're gonna do. So it might have been that it was a priority. So thank you. In terms of body language, now, we briefly touched on body language. There were hands gestures, there were shrugging. Is there any more comments that you guys have for body language, or do you think we covered it fairly well?
Your face got really red, really white. When you were running, it was red. When you were focused, it was white. I'm not sure what was happening to you. It worried me a few minutes, but
Focus.
you could see like what, you could see the gears going. You could see what part of it you were in.
Determined.
The pace of
Yeah.
your walking back and forth was hastened as well.
Yeah, you moved pretty quick. I had to run at one point to get you.
Interesting. And I felt
Yeah, and I saw you the first time.
you shaking it off. So
Stop.
in terms of tone of voice, and this is an open-ended question for you guys, do you feel as though tone of voice had the same effect as active listening, or rather, do you think active listening and tone of voice were both due to the same set of reasons? It being important,
I think it balanced. each
focus
other out.
maybe?
You could hear the seriousness in your voice when you were given those instructions, or even when you were repeating them back or asking your clarifying questions. You could just hear, there was no joking, there was no, it was, like you said, this is your task, you need to get it done, I mean, it's serious.
With how
And that-
serious you were with it, it made me sit up, because I was fairly relaxed, because my
Yeah.
kids have those.
I'm sorry, I'm a gamer, man. I just
That's fine, so my kids have those, and I recognize, I know what these parts are and how to describe them, and as soon as you're like, I'm like, oh, he's really pretty serious about this, I need to change my.
Yeah. I also
But then,
noticed
yeah,
too,
that
your
shows
tone.
his body language too. He got up,
Okay.
he,
Yeah, very calm tone. If you asked, because I remember you asking about the pieces again, and he wanted to make sure that you understood it the second time, so I did kind of notice more of a serious tone, like a more, okay, this is what it is.
Okay.
I did notice a little bit of a difference when you had to do that the second time, because it was taking a while.
but then what happened went to his face when Noah got interrupted?
Oh, when, that was
I was-
just priceless.
I was angry. Like,
It was,
subconsciously, it was like,
it was annoying.
I was consciously angry.
subconscious. So take a second to think about that. In general, this whole demonstration could show us how different parameters, how different situations, how interacting with other people can immediately change the way that we communicate, the way that we perceive others' communications. So for those of you who are watching, and even for myself, watching Wes, watching Greg, it was interesting to see everyone in a different dynamic. And I think the dynamic for a certain time being may have been controlled by the situation. I don't know if you would agree with that statement, but I think maybe at least they had some.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
I think I asked this earlier, but did anybody, knowing Donnie was the observer, did anybody look at his face?
No,
I did not. Not a
I
single
wasn't
time.
on task.
That's a great question.
Did you, Greg?
You know, the person that's, for lack of better words, judging you,
Yeah.
and did anybody ever think to look
I
at
didn't
his
think
face and
twice.
see maybe what his,
No.
Okay, well, it's a good thing you didn't.
because it
Now that
looks
you
just
say
like
that,
this?
No. I remember there being a time where I was standing behind Greg. He wasn't looking at me, he was staring intensely, like, at Greg. And when he was putting pieces together, I noticed myself doing like this. And with the
You
light-
should have been
He was right
watching.
behind
I
you.
thought to myself, I was like, you know, I don't want to give anything away, so now I need to stay neutral. But I remember trying not to give anything away, because I remember bobbing my head when things were going good at one point.
Did anyone watch Doc? She did. I guess you're the only one. So
I
can call it
didn't
out.
see that
Did you?
part, but I was watching him.
What was his reaction like?
A lot of times, and it may have even been after that, because he was very, he had the same focus face on, almost as if he was doing some part in it. Like he was building, or he was like thinking
Yeah.
about how would I say this if I was doing this, or how would I put this together if I was doing it. And I didn't see the head nod, but you could see like the concentration.
That's interesting. I didn't, honestly, I didn't really think.
And if you wouldn't have caught that, you would have doing it the whole time. You would have
Exactly.
used him as your.
So what I'm going to do
Trying
now.
to
Go ahead. I'm handing you all a piece of candy. Did you get him? So, what we're going to do here, and this is to further Act's point, or today's lesson in communication. So we have what were your observations. We saw an actual demonstration of what we're about to talk about today. So what I would like you to do with your candy, first of all, does anyone have any aversion to the type of candy that I don't want to give you something that's, oh, I'm allergic or I don't eat sugar, anything like that. Okay, so what we're going to do is everyone is going to place the candy in their mouth and give me 2 descriptive words. The rules, and I will give you some rules, you can't use the same word as somebody else, and all the words have to be different. I'm going to list the words, and I'm going to kind of actually place this a little bit more, since there's just a few of us. So, we can start with whoever is willing and feels like they've experienced it enough to describe.
Sweet.
Sweet.
Sour.
Sour. And these are in no particular order, so I'm not going to keep individual
Hard.
people's together. Tart.
Hard.
Heart.
No,
Hard.
not a heart.
No, I got you now.
Sorry, it was
Sorry.
candy in my mouth.
It's my
You
fault.
know, pretty good right too.
Thank you.
Soothing.
You have mint?
Grape.
Did you say grape?
Round.
Round.
It's like making ours.
Juicy.
Juicy. And now by process of elimination, I think I counted how many of you there are, so there should be, what's the second one?
Holy.
Holy?
Yeah, it's got a hole in the center. Heck yeah, it's
Uh,
holy.
How do I, does anyone know how to spell
There's a
holy?
couple ways to spell
H-O-L.
holy, yeah, but it should be the W-H-O-L-E-Y, right?
Okay.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
L-E-Y.
It's got a hole in it.
Right.
Breathe in.
Holy!
It felt weird. Can you do this
Good
separate?
spelling.
Okay, so
Don't think I was saying holy.
what do you think we're getting at here?
There are many words to describe an item.
There are many words to describe the same thing. One thing that I'd like to do that's not actually in the material, but that's just real quick, can we identify if these things are looks like, feels like, sounds like, smells like?
Sure.
So sweet, that'd be feels like, tastes like.
Taste. Oh.
What were the choices?
Wait. Yeah, what?
So let's go with sensory. So along the lines of what does accountability look like? What does communication look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like?
Look, sound, and feel are 3.
Let's do that one. Look, sound, and feel.
Looks. Round.
So round is a look.
Old.
Holy is a look.
Grape could be a look because it's
Yep.
purple.
Okay.
Hard is feels. Soothing feels.
Sweet is a feel. Right?
I mean, if it would make it easier, we can
It's
open it up to taste. I mean, it's clearly a food,
Yeah.
so we
Ooh,
can.
last favorite taste.
Let's say if sweet and sour
Yeah,
are both
taste.
taste words.
No,
Juicy.
Oh,
Nothing
it's just-
sound.
Juicy as well.
Nothing sound.
Yeah.
Nothing sound. And juicy would
Which is
be.
loud, crunchy.
Crunchy.
Yeah.
Well, let's add crunchy just for the sake of argument, just because I guess it could be. So it's interesting, you have one little piece of candy that can be 8 or 9 different descriptive words coming from 8 or 9 different contexts of how to describe it. So it just goes to show, you know, just like in the Lego discussion, I mean, how many versions, or let me ask you this question, how many times did we watch the Lego activity? Simple question. Twice. How many different descriptions, opinions, observations did we have about the same 2 things that we watched?
Bunches.
More than we can count.
A serious amount, more than we can count. So, I'm going to read an excerpt here from the training manual, and the reason is, yesterday Donnie mentioned a specific quote this quote is actually right in here. And there's one paragraph that I think I wouldn't be able to do it justice by paraphrasing. So, communication is no, and I'm not reading right now, I'll let you know what communication is no different from using the descriptive words. Everybody comes from their own culture. You're from one place, you're from one place, you're from Daytona, I'm from Norfolk. Everybody has their own upbringing, everybody has their own culture, background, everyone has their own perception. So, if on candy, there's such a difference, and obviously I gave you the parameters of you can't say the same word, but it wouldn't be very hard to think of something other than one of these. Think about it in the context of talking with people. We described earlier, or for the past couple days, that you have people who you don't know where they've come from, you don't know what their experiences are, and just have the perspective of it can be wider than you imagine. So the one thing I'm going to read is, we may be open to discussions of emotions, or we may disclose very little about our personal thoughts or feelings. We may hold biases, prejudices, fears, or misconceptions about others that keep us from seeing their value. Each of these patterns creates an opportunity to open or close the lines of communication between us. However, the more knowledge and understanding we gain, the more positioned we are to communicate effectively, broaden our personal perspective, and appreciate and respect the perspective of others. Donnie, if you don't mind sharing that last paragraph, however, the more knowledge and understanding we gain, the more positioned we are to communicate effectively. What quote does that essentially summarize? The one you were talking about before.
Is that one of these?
No, it's one that you said is personal to yourself. They have written on your fridge.
I don't have those yet.
Okay.
I don't.
No, and it's not in the text.
Oh, I got it.
So it is literally, seek first to understand, then be understood. The more knowledge and understanding we gain, the better positioned we are to communicate effectively. Could everyone now please turn to page 38? And we were on 37. I don't know if that's a page turn. Yes, it is. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to move the candy words. And what we're going to do is write down some communication barriers. In our last class, where Sheena did the Legos, we got to talking about this pretty briefly, and I remember Wes literally answering this question 8 times in about 30 seconds, just listing them. Well, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into communication barriers and try and better understand where people may be coming from and hopefully break down some of those barriers so that we can be a bit more effective. So I'm not going to call on anyone specific, but if we could just start to list, and keep in mind the Lego thing. What are some barriers for communication, some things that hold us back? Language. Okay.
Could be hurried, could be like a time factor.
Time.
Interpretation.
Interpretation. Can I spell? Is that
Yeah.
a 26-digit word?
Patience.
Patience.
Environment.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Environment.
Environment, okay.
Distraction.
Distraction. Now, I could definitely put more, if you guys are willing to offer more, or if there's anything at the top of your head that you don't feel has been said. So, what we're going to do with this list is we're going to take a look individually at all of the things on the list, and we're going to start to break down what type of things we can put in place to overcome these things. So, let's start with language. What do you think could help break a language barrier for communication.
Google Translate.
That's fair. Sorry. A mediator, you're some sort of translation.
I've used it before.
Now, I'm going to make these a little bit smaller because I'm assuming there's going to be more than one possible solution. Does anyone have any other solutions for language? Think outside of spoken language and maybe a little bit
Take
more
time
into.
to understand, it's all the same. Take time. I mean, I think you're saying like, assuming it's all English, but there's still different languages.
Yeah, exactly. Reword what you're saying? Reinforce? Clarify? Is that?
Trying to say it a different way, like maybe, like if you kept saying how to put these two blocks together, and no matter how, you kept saying it the same way, but Greg wasn't getting it, maybe you need to reword it, find a different way to explain it so that.
May I write try another way?
Yeah.
I think active listening is pretty good, because even within the United States, there's different dialogues or dialects and accents. And sometimes if somebody's from the South, I really have to pay attention to what they're saying.
I think patience is a good one too.
Patience. I'm going to put this under here. And so one thing I've just realized is I think maybe having purple on purple on purple is not necessarily helping us. So I'm going to go to brown, which is not the greatest of colors in my opinion. All right, let's move on to time. What type of? Let's first of all identify, what we can do to. What if it's not in our hands? What if it's like prioritize? So yeah, I was going to say, what if it is a parameter where it's no, you got 5 minutes, figure it out. Okay. Outside of time not being movable, how do we overcome things like that?
Have realistic expectations.
Thank you.
Teamwork, maybe you help it to be able to finish or task you're doing. Teamwork.
Teamwork. Anything else for time?
Also, when it comes to time, sometimes it's an understanding. So maybe asking more the right question or understanding how much time do we have?
Okay.
Or just knowing,
Knowing your time frame.
Sometimes, yeah, some people, they say they don't have time, but maybe they don't see the value, so if you ask the right question, maybe fill up their time. Maybe they can make time, they just don't know.
Okay. Anyone else for time? Otherwise, we can work on interpretation. Okay, so how might interpretation block communication?
That's probably the key word on the whole thing,
Interpretation.
is how we perceive something is controlling our whole language.
So I'm going to write perception here, if that's okay.
I think for interpretation, you could use education as well, because if I'm more mechanically educated and you're not, I'm using terminology that you may not know. You may not know how to interpret what I said.
That makes sense.
The only way to improve it is just to keep asking clarifying questions.
Okay. Anything else for interpretation? May I add something, if you guys don't mind?
Sure.
When we were talking about perception, sometimes I think of the word assume. Interpretation in some cases could be an assumption. So maybe trying to gather your facts. So I'm going to just put fact finding here, kind of represent that. Patience. This one may seem pretty cut and dry, but I'd be interested to see what you guys have to say about how to.
I think the more frustrated you get with something, the harder it is for you to complete something or to communicate something because you're not you don't have like a clear mind, you're letting your emotions get in the way. I know, like when I get frustrated with something, if I'm trying to put something together and I can't do it, it's one of those I have to go away because now I'm at the point where I'm never gonna get it.
So I put clear-minded there for you.
What happens when you're frustrated and impatient and get distracted?
Me personally, or just
Yeah.
in general?
Yeah.
Sometimes I think distractions can be a good thing. If they can maybe take your mind off what's frustrating you to begin with, depending on what you're being interrupted with.
Okay.
But I think if I'm already angry and now a negative interruption happens, it's one of those where I might have to need a minute to walk away because I want to give an answer, I want to respond to something without something else having an effect to it.
So would you say it would depend on your state of mind?
It's a big one, because let's just say when you were doing this exercise, who came to you?
Marcia and.
Domingo.
When Domingo came to you, let's just pretend he was with the customer, he had no idea you were doing that puzzle, he legitimately needed you.
I would have stopped.
Huh?
I would have stopped.
Yeah, but how would you know?
I would, I don't know, it's interesting.
In his body language, I think, would have pulled up.
Because he was the one who didn't realize it.
Yeah, well, I
Well,
didn't know.
and if I'm being honest, I did fall for it. So when he went to distract me, I did look right at him and listen to what he said. I heard exactly what he told me to say.
Well, another example, you're working with an LIS, and the customer's waiting, you're into it, another one comes out of nowhere and interrupts you, you know?
And I think it's hard, like if you're talking to an LIS and a customer comes up and interrupts you, where does your attention go? Obviously, you're probably more likely to go towards the customer that's right there in front of you.
My point with that patience word is huge.
I'll
Well,
tell you,
so how do
patience
you
is-
work that out?
You have to be able to
Speak for me. I mean,
separate
it's
two
something that I've worked
situations.
at so much because there are times you're doing 3, 4, 5 different things at one
Yeah.
time. Somebody will come up to you and say,
Here's your 6.
Hey, I have
Yeah.
yeah, which happens a lot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it does. And it's probably one of the biggest up there that I've had to work on, and if I could be, kind of turn it inward a little bit.
Yeah, I think you learn to adapt to it.
Well,
Like,
you,
I had
I think patience is letting people know
I
that
mean,
you're
there's
busy.
so many
Yeah.
things, like it could be prioritized and all of that, but what comes first when
Like I
something comes
had-
through there, and patience, right?
I had an appraisal for Toyota, and up comes Jack with one. And I drove my Toyota one down to Hyundai, took my Hyundai one, brought it back up. In the meantime, I did a TO here and took my trade back down, did a TO there, and just kind of,
That's a moment of clarity.
You know what I
It's prioritizing, it's slowing down your 5 things that you have going on, and.
So let me ask you a specific question, and one word that you just mentioned, prioritizing, maybe one way around this, but like in Greg's scenario that he just brought up, say that you're with an LIS and you're doing something that you and the LIS both feel is important, growth opportunity, maybe a one-on-one, and somebody comes over with a customer. Let's say you have a limited amount of time. It's 2:30, you leave at 3 o'clock, you have to get a certain amount of stuff done. What might you guys do to handle a situation like that, or what suggestions would you have to not negatively affect either one?
I think the customer you take care of, and you take the LIS with you as a learning opportunity.
Okay, that's a good idea because now both sides are still involved. Nobody gets left out. And there's, I would assume there may be some value for both parties involved. Anyone have other suggestions? How to handle a situation like that? So environment is the next one that we talked about. And what I did for patience was I put a huge asterisk and put clear-minded. There's too much to write in patience, but I at least wanted to highlight that it's paramount to breaking down barriers for communication. Environment. Think about how during the Legos it was almost entirely environment. It was, he's out here, I'm over here, he's running back and forth, there were distractions, there's a time constraint, the blocks are foreign language. I think a lot of these things could fit into environment, language, time, interpretation, how people are perceiving everything around them. What's one way that you can either change the environment or overcome an environment that you can't change for the sake of communicating?
So for me personally, I sometimes have to find a quieter spot, because where I sit is near the shop, there's a lot of noise out there, depending on what's actually going on.
I'm gonna put relocate.
Let's grab a coffee.
I did that yesterday, actually, when we were trying to get started and everyone was kind of asking questions. I couldn't concentrate, I had to get to a different place I could concentrate. I was trying to be rude.
Yeah, I saw that when we were starting our things here.
I just couldn't get my brain going,
Well, thank you, I appreciate that.
Knowing that.
And that's another example of relocate. If the environment's not right and it's not conducive for what you're trying to do, maybe you pick a different environment. That's fair. Anyone else on environment? So we've talked about trying to change your environment. Say you can't, say it is a game, say there are parameters. Is there anything that you can increase or do to overcome that?
I think,
it's focus.
yeah,
Whatever you have to do to focus.
I was just gonna say, it could be situational as well, which is why you might want to relocate, or, it could be noisy, it could be so many things, like helping a customer and knowing that you want to help a customer where they're comfortable, which might be at the desk, maybe sitting with them instead of across from them. So I think it's knowing the situation and knowing it's in front of you.
I think sometimes practicing too, in the environment that you're gonna have to work in.
Would you mind if I put practice outside of all of these? I think practice, we might find that it's a bit more useful in time and language and patience, practicing patience. So I'm going to put practice over here. Just like in the ACT formula, it's a work in progress. I'm new to facilitating. I've been through ACT once or twice. Some of you are new, some of you are not. But the thing we need to understand is that it's a work in progress, but the progress itself is the point. So practice can be very important in that. Last but not least, distractions. That's something that we threw into the game late. I gotta say, it caught me off guard. So I don't know what you guys had in terms of suggestions for overcoming distractions, because in my situation there, that was an immediate, why are you talking to me? And I may have mishandled that situation.
That's the point.
It was a point, but I fell victim.
Because I struggle with that more than anything on that pitch.
Distractions.
I haven't found a main solution other than just be patient and don't set. Sometimes you have timetables you set for yourself, and you just have to put them aside. I want to accomplish this in the next hour, and then the world breaks loose on you, and you just say, okay, put it aside, focus on this.
With distractions though, an example for me is I'm working on the computer, I'm on the phone with a customer, wholesale, and a technician comes in and throws their paperwork on top of my hands. I just have to let them know without freaking out on them, because that is very rude. I have to let them know. I say, look, I'm on the phone right now. As soon as I'm done, I'll get to your paperwork. That's a distraction to me, but letting somebody know that they're distracting you sometimes eliminates the distraction. Because if you don't let them know that they're distracting you, sometimes they keep distracting you.
So there's a real fundamental difference there that can I speak to parts a little bit?
Absolutely.
My experience.
Absolutely.
So the technician always feels whatever part they're working on is the most important thing in the world.
Okay.
And a parts person is usually attending to multiple technicians, multiple customer cars, customer at the counter, a wholesaler calling, a retailer. And they can't distinguish between an internal and external customer because they're all customers. And that's that concept is offensive to the guy who's working on a car. Hey, time's money. I'm not getting paid when I'm sitting here.
Yeah, it's our house
And there's
first.
that disconnect.
So it's perspective too.
It's absolute perspective.
So let me ask you this question. Wes, what you described was someone else coming and distracting you. I think what I heard Greg describing a little bit were distractions that he creates for himself. Do you think you have distractions that are both created by the self and created by other people? Do you think you lean more one way or another? How much do we get in our own way?
What you guys can eat.
In general. I mean, if it was a follow-up question to what you said, then I guess I would be asking you, but anyone can feel free to answer it.
My position has one real big distinction.
Mhm.
I can be working in the business, I can be working on the business. If
Okay.
I'm working on the business, I can't work in the business and vice versa. And so when all the employees see you, they expect you to be working in and be with them. The problem is there is significantly more work to be done on the business. And so what you have to do, what I've learned to do is that I'm gonna work, once I get everything stabilized and there's, people are growing and they're doing everything, then I work on it until someone needs me to work in it. And I stop immediately and I work in it until that task is done. And I give myself that freedom saying, I don't care if I have this multi-year budget I gotta work on for somebody. This is what's priority.
Okay.
The challenge is when you just start,
Well,
then you
yeah.
have operational needs, urgent operational needs, urgent personnel needs,
Yeah.
and then working and working on them.
So does it depend what environment you're in,
Yeah.
which distractions you have? So am I right in thinking, maybe when you're physically in the hamburger store, your distractions are people, are in the business? But if you need stuff that you need to work on,
The distractions are always the obstacles that people face.
Okay.
So whatever he's facing is causing a ripple effect down through the business. Uncovering those nuggets, figuring out that obstacle and solving that obstacle has a ripple effect the opposite way. Now you're gonna find those nuggets and people don't necessarily want to tell you.
So may I write, find out why? Find out why the distractions exist.
Right. When the natural tendency is to not tell you. Which is very human, it's just normal.
And if it's personal, so if it's something personal now.
Yeah, how would you relate?
Like eat it out, like one bite at a time.
Yeah.
I think that ties back into building trust with them because no one's just gonna, pour out all of their personal information at work if they don't have that kind of rapport with you. They're not gonna tell you those certain things. And if you're someone I trust and you're someone I have that kind of relationship with, and I can see it affecting my work and I need to talk to somebody about it, you should be the person I go to. You know what I mean? Who is that person?
Well, and think about yourself at home. Think about even just using this brief example, how communication and trust affect each other. If there's a distraction, how do other people perceive that distraction at home? If I say, okay, no problem, I'll clean the bathroom, and 20 minutes later I'm not cleaning the bathroom, is it perceived that, well, maybe he doesn't care, maybe he doesn't know what to do? And then in that situation you have to ask yourself, have I communicated what I'm currently doing? Am I being accountable for what I said that I was going to do? Do they trust that I'm doing what I told them, or will do them, or do what I told them to do? So, taking it home is just one of those things where it's to each his own, but during every lesson, I always get just one little thing that's like, either I recognize that maybe I'm using it at home, maybe I'm not using it at home, maybe I'd like to start implementing it, but kind of seeing what the communication barriers are, how to break them down, overcome them, and then offering each other suggestions. The goal is to make us all better communicators so that we can continue to progress and grow. I'm going to read quick from the book here. So I just wanted to thank you guys again. Obviously we're working on communication, and I believe our next module is the last communication module. I could be wrong. It's either the last or second to last communication module. So we're going to continue to build on these things that we talked about, and remember that once you take it outside of this training, outside of the class, it's really up to you how it travels. You're the vessel for the information. So just keep that in mind. Thank you guys for coming. Before we leave, if you just wanted to quick share with the class or mention one quick thing that you learned from today.
For me, communication barriers. So many barriers, so many things that I guess you don't realize, but in great communication, staying focused no matter what the environment is, no matter what the level of understanding is, essentially that's such a big part of what we do. You don't realize. all the different things that can maybe alter your communication if you're not thinking about it and if you're not focused.
Thank you.
Okay. So looking at, when you guys were commenting on the little chart I made, and I heard you when I was pulling the stick, it's like, one by one. And you're doing the same thing here, just in a different chart. You're taking communication barriers, now you're breaking it down to something, you're taking those words and breaking them down even further, and even further, and even further. It's just, they're the same things.
Oh, well, and some of the commonalities I see between a lot of the courses are, it's about getting down to the roots, it's about figuring out why.
Keep going, does it just end up at one word? Probably. We're still trying.
I think this one really revealed to me how each one of these lessons, if we just say it's 60 minutes and we're leaving, you're really doing injustice to the learner. Because you didn't tie any of this stuff into the work or business, but if we started looking at actual problems a little bit more, this could double the time and it would be tremendous value,
Yeah.
breaking down barriers.
Like if I asked,
You know,
where functionally do we have a language barrier?
I mean, if you get a good room full of mixed, this could be a 2-hour conversation that could mean light years.
Yeah.
Because someone, we could have a parts counter guy throw down his pen and say, every time I do this is what you do to me, right?
Yeah.
And the technician can fire back, and it could be really meaningful.
Well, and bringing more people in brings more perspectives, more cultures, more outside views, and then you get more different words, and you might be able to uncover something that's like, oh, wait a second,
I know, that's what I'm
let's
saying.
hang out here for a little bit.
Yeah, to
So
that
thank
point, for communication barrier for me, my own ignorance of other positions within the dealership, that's a communication barrier, period.
Okay.
Not even understanding, being able to empathize with somebody else's position.
Thank you for saying that. It's horrible. Well, thank you guys.